He dialed the number, fully intending to fire the maid who hadn't shown up in 3 days. But when the line clicked open, it wasn't her voice. A trembling, 5-year-old boy whispered 2 words that stopped the ruthless syndicate boss cold. "Help us." Then, a gunshot shattered the background. Silas Blackwood was a man who demanded absolute order. In his world, a sprawling, violent empire, hidden behind the legitimate steel and glass facade of Blackwood Logistics in downtown Chicago, chaos meant death. Every ledger was balanced, every shipment was tracked, every employee arrived exactly when they were supposed to. So, when his private estate cleaner, Clara Davies, missed her 3rd consecutive shift without a single phone call, Silas's patience didn't just wear thin, it shattered. Silas stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Gold Coast penthouse, the icy wind off Lake Michigan rattling the reinforced glass. He checked his watch, a heavy platinum Patek Philippe Nautilus. It was 8 a.m. on a Friday. Clara was supposed to be here at 6 a.m. sharp to polish the marble floors and sanitize a home that frequently hosted men who carried suppressed weapons in their custom Tom Ford suits. Clara had been hired 6 months ago through an ultra-exclusive firm, Sterling Domestic Staffing. She was a ghost, quiet, exceptionally thorough, and deeply unremarkable, with tired brown eyes and a habit of looking at the floor whenever Silas entered a room. She drove a rusting 2012 Honda Civic that looked completely out of place, parked next to Silas's armored Mercedes-Benz G-Class. But she was reliable. Until now. "Should I send someone to her listed address?" asked Declan, Silas's right-hand man, leaning against the mahogany doorframe. Declan was a massive, scarred Irishman who handled Blackwood's collections. "No," Silas replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "If she's stealing time, she's likely stealing something else. Or she's just lazy. I don't tolerate either. I'll terminate her contract myself." Silas picked up his encrypted satellite phone. He pulled up Clara's file, staring at the grainy ID photo of the pale, exhausted-looking woman, and dialed her number. It rang 4 times. He was about to hang up, assuming it would go to voicemail, when the line clicked. There was no greeting, just the sound of shallow, erratic breathing. "Clara," Silas said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass, "you have exactly 10 seconds to explain your absence before my security team cleans out your locker." Silence. Then, a sharp, muffled thud echoed through the speaker, followed by the sound of breaking wood. "Mommy?" A tiny, trembling voice whispered into the receiver. Silas froze. His grip on the phone tightened. Clara didn't have a child listed on her employment background check. "Who is this?" Silas demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I can't find Mommy," the child sobbed quietly. "She told me to hide in the dark place. She gave me the phone. She said if the bad men came back, I pressed the green button." Silas's blood turned to ice. He was a monster to his enemies, a phantom to the FBI, but he had rules. Women and children were never collateral damage. "Listen to me," Silas said, his tone instantly shifting from a ruthless boss to a calm, commanding anchor. "What is your name?" "Leo," the boy whimpered. "Leo, my name is Silas. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't make a sound. What do you hear?" "They're breaking the door," Leo cried softly. Over the line, Silas could hear the distinct sound of heavy boots on hardwood floors. Then, a voice. It wasn't Clara's. It was a man's voice, thick with an Eastern European accent, shouting, "Tear the place apart. Find the drive. If she wakes up and won't talk, cut her fingers off." Then, a deafening crack, a gunshot. Leo let out a muffled shriek. The phone clattered against a hard surface, but the line remained open. Silas lowered the phone from his ear. The anger he felt minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. Clara wasn't lazy. She was being tortured, and whoever was doing it had just made the mistake of leaving the line connected to the deadliest man in Chicago. "Declan," Silas said, tossing the phone onto the granite kitchen island. "Get Wyatt on the line. I want this call traced right now." Declan saw the look in his boss's eyes, a look that usually preceded a massacre. "What happened?" "Our maid is being hunted," Silas said, pulling a Glock 19 from a biometric safe under the counter and racking the slide. and we are going to find out why. It took Wyatt Blackwood Logistics' chief cybersecurity architect less than 3 minutes to ping the cell tower and triangulate the signal from Clara's cheap prepaid phone. It's a derelict apartment complex in Rogers Park. Wyatt's voice crackled through the earpiece as Silas and Declan sped northbound on DuSable Lakeshore Drive. Silas was behind the wheel of the blacked-out Escalade, the V8 engine roaring as he aggressively swerved through the morning traffic. Unit 4B. The building was supposed to be condemned last year. No security cameras, no doorman. Perfect place to do something you don't want anyone to see. Have a cleanup crew ready on standby, Silas ordered, his knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. Silas, Declan said from the passenger seat, loading a magazine into his Heckler & Koch MP5. Why are we doing this? She cleans your floors. If she's tangled up with the Bratva or some independent crew, it's her funeral. We expose ourselves by walking in there. They asked about a drive, Silas replied, his jaw clenched. A maid doesn't get tortured over a thumb drive unless she took it from somewhere important. She spends 40 hours a week inside my home, Declan. If she stole data from me, I need to know. And if someone is torturing my staff to get to me, I need to kill them. They arrived at the coordinates 12 minutes later. The building was a rotting brick structure, its fire escapes rusted shut, the alleyway reeking of stale beer and wet garbage. Silas parked the Escalade, blocking the alley exit. They moved in complete silence. Silas and Declan were professionals. They didn't kick down the front doors like rookies. They picked the lock on the basement entrance and moved up the concrete stairwell, moving like shadows. When they reached the 4th floor, the smell hit them first. Copper and sweat. Blood. The door to Unit 4B was already off its hinges, hanging limply by one screw. Silas pressed his back against the peeling wallpaper of the hallway, holding up 2 fingers. Declan mirrored his stance on the other side. Inside, heavy breathing and the sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed in the cramped space. I'm going to ask you one last time, a rough voice growled. Where is the ledger, Clara? You think your little hiding spot is safe? We already checked the Honda. A weak, agonizing cough followed. I don't have it. Silas pivoted around the doorframe, his Glock raised, perfectly parallel to the floor. The apartment was a disaster. Furniture was gutted, upholstery slashed to ribbons. In the center of the living room, tied to a wooden dining chair, was Clara. Her face was swollen, blood dripping from her split lip onto her cheap gray uniform. Standing over her were 2 men. One was holding a pair of heavy industrial pliers. The other was tossing a room, throwing books off a shelf. Silas didn't issue a warning. He didn't ask them to surrender. In his world, you didn't negotiate with home invaders. Pft, pft, pft. 2 silenced shots dropped the man searching the bookshelves. The rounds caught him directly in the chest, folding him like a cheap suit. The man with the pliers spun around, his eyes widening in shock, but Declan was already there. Declan slammed the stock of his MP5 into the man's jaw, shattering bone with a sickening crunch. The man collapsed to the floor, groaning, bleeding profusely from his mouth. Silas kept his weapon trained on the downed man, his boots crunching over broken glass as he approached Clara. She was barely conscious, her right eye completely swollen shut. When she saw Silas standing there in his bespoke charcoal suit, holding a smoking gun, she flinched in absolute terror. Silas, she whispered, her voice a raspy croak. Where is the boy? Silas asked, his voice softer than before, though his eyes remained dead and cold. Clara weakly nodded toward the hallway. The vent. Behind the washing machine. Silas gestured to Declan to secure the surviving thug. He walked down the narrow, dark hallway, sliding a heavy, broken washing machine away from the wall with one arm. Behind it, an old air conditioning grate had been unscrewed. Curled in a ball inside the dusty ductwork was little Leo, clutching the green Motorola flip phone, his face streaked with tears and dirt. Leo, Silas said quietly, holstering his weapon so the boy wouldn't see it. It's Silas. From the phone. You can come out now. The boy hesitated, his terrified eyes locked onto Silas. Slowly, he crawled out into Silas's waiting arms. Silas lifted the child effortlessly, carrying him back to the living room and pressing the boy's face into his shoulder so he wouldn't look at the dead man on the floor. Declan had zip-tied the surviving thug's hands behind his back and dragged him to his knees. "All right, friend," Silas said, his voice dropping into a register that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. He stepped close to the bleeding man. "Who sent you, and what drive are you looking for?" The thug coughed up a mixture of blood and teeth. He looked at Silas, then looked over at Clara, and let out a wet, mocking laugh. "You think we came here for a maid, Blackwood?" The man sneered, his accent thick. "You're a fool. We didn't come for her because she cleans your floors." The man spat a glob of blood onto Silas's expensive Italian leather shoes. "We came for her because she's the one who planted the bug in your private study." Silas froze. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. Silas slowly turned his head to look at the woman tied to the chair. Clara wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking right at him, tears streaming down her bruised face, her expression a mixture of profound guilt and absolute terror. She wasn't just a maid. She was a spy. And Silas had just saved the life of the woman who was trying to destroy him. The silence in the ruined apartment was absolute, save for the ragged, uneven breathing of the bleeding thug on the floor. Silas Blackwood stood perfectly still, the 5-year-old boy trembling against his chest, his piercing blue eyes locked onto Clara. The woman he paid to scrub his floors, the woman who kept her eyes downcast and spoke in nervous whispers, had infiltrated the most secure, private residence in Chicago. Declan didn't hesitate. With a feral growl, the massive enforcer pivoted, raising his MP5 directly at Clara's chest. "Give me the word, boss," Declan snarled, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I'll paint the wall with her." Clara squeezed her swollen eyes shut, bracing for the thunderous crack of the rifle. She didn't beg. She just leaned her head back against the wooden chair, waiting for the dark. "Stand down, Declan," Silas commanded. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a lethal, quiet hiss that instantly sucked the oxygen from the room. "Silas! She bugged the study," Declan argued, his weapon barely wavering. "She's a rat. You know the penalty for that." "I said, stand down," Silas repeated, stepping between the barrel of the gun and the bruised woman. He looked down at the thug kneeling on the floor. With a swift, brutal motion, Silas drove the heel of his Italian leather shoe into the man's broken jaw, sending him sprawling into unconsciousness. Silas gently set little Leo down on a relatively clean patch of the floor, out of sight of the carnage. "Cover your ears, buddy," he murmured. He then turned to Clara, pulling a custom Benchmade knife from his inner jacket pocket. He sliced through the heavy zip ties binding her wrists. Clara slumped forward, gasping in pain as blood flow returned to her hands. "You have exactly 3 minutes to convince me not to let Declan finish his job," Silas said, dragging a shattered wooden stool over and sitting down so he was eye level with her. "Who do you work for, Clara? The feds? The Italians? Who?" Clara coughed, spitting a mixture of blood and saliva onto the hardwood. "Neither," she rasped, her hands shaking as she touched her split lip. "I work for a man named Arthur Mitchell. He's a dirty DEA supervisor. He runs a rogue task force." Silas's brow furrowed. Mitchell was a known ghost in the underworld, a badge-carrying extortionist who used cartel muscle to eliminate his rivals and seize their assets. "Mitchell came to me 8 months ago," Clara continued, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her battered cheeks. "My late husband, he wasn't a good man. He owed Mitchell's crew over $200,000 in gambling debts before he overdosed. Mitchell told me the debt transferred to me. He said if I didn't get a job with Sterling Domestic Staffing and plant a transmitter in your home, he would take Leo away. He said he'd put him in the system, and I would never, ever see my little boy again." Silas stared at her. His empire was built on reading lies, detecting the slightest micro-expressions of deceit. Clara was telling the absolute, unvarnished truth. The desperation of a mother, cornered by a predator. "So you planted the bug," Silas stated, his tone devoid of judgment. "Yes," she confessed, refusing to look away this time. "Under the mahogany baseboard behind your desk. But, 2 weeks ago, I heard Mitchell talking to one of his lieutenants on the burner phone he gave me. He wasn't planning on just arresting you, Silas. He's working with the Volkov syndicate. He gave them the layout of your security grid. They were planning to raid your estate, kill you, and take over the logistics ports. Declan cursed loudly under his breath, pacing the room. The Volkovs. The Russian pigs. That explains these two dead weights on the floor. I couldn't let it happen, Clara whispered. If they killed you, Mitchell would still own me. I would never be free. So, I used the access codes Mitchell gave me for the drop site. I broke into his server locker. I stole the master ledger drive. Silas's eyes widened slightly. You robbed Arthur Mitchell? The drive has every offshore account, every bribe, every dirty cop on his payroll, and his direct communications with the Volkovs, Clara said, leaning forward, her breath hitching. I was going to use it to buy my freedom, but they tracked my phone before I could disappear. That's why they were tearing my apartment apart. Silas looked at the fragile, bruised woman sitting before him. He had spent his life surrounded by hardened killers and ruthless mobsters, but the sheer audacity of this 5'4" maid stealing the most dangerous blackmail file in the city left him genuinely astounded. Where's the drive, Clara? Silas asked softly. Clara slowly reached up, her trembling fingers digging into the thick, messy bun of her hair. From the center of the tangled knot, she pulled out a tiny, silver, USB micro drive. I knew they would strip the apartment, she whispered. I knew they would check the car. They never check a woman's hair when they're busy hitting her. Silas took the drive from her bloody fingers. It felt heavy with the weight of absolute power. Declan, Silas said, standing up, his mind already formulating a war strategy. Call the cleaners. Have these bodies turned to ash. Then, call Wyatt. Tell him to prep the secure servers at the waterfront safe house. What about them? Declan asked, nodding toward Clara and the terrified boy. Silas looked at Leo, who was peeking bravely from behind a torn sofa, and then down at Clara. The fury he had felt earlier had morphed into something entirely different. A fierce, possessive need to protect. They are coming with us, Silas declared. Clara just handed us the keys to destroy our two biggest enemies in one night. She's under my protection now. The waterfront safe house was a fortress disguised as a luxury penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. For 3 days, Clara and Leo remained inside its bulletproof glass walls. Silas had brought in a private underground doctor to stitch Clara's lip and treat her concussion. He had also bought a small mountain of toys and clothes for Leo. During those 3 days, Silas barely slept. He and Wyatt decrypted Mitchell's drive, meticulously dismantling the corrupt DEA agent's empire piece by piece. Silas didn't just want to kill Mitchell and the Volkovs, he wanted to ruin them. On the 4th night, the tension in the penthouse was thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara walked into the main living area, wearing a soft, oversized cashmere sweater Silas had provided. The swelling on her face had gone down, leaving a patchwork of fading purple and yellow bruises. Silas was standing by the window, pouring 2 fingers of expensive bourbon into a crystal glass. He looked exhausted, the shadow of stubble darkening his sharp jawline, his tie loosened around his neck. Is it done? Clara asked, her voice quiet. Silas turned, his blue eyes locking onto hers. The air between them crackled. Over the past few days, the dynamic had violently shifted. She was no longer the invisible maid, and he was no longer just the intimidating boss. There was a raw, dangerous intimacy between them, forged in blood and shared secrets. It's done, Silas said, taking a slow sip of the bourbon. Wyatt leaked the financial records to the FBI's internal affairs and 5 major news outlets simultaneously an hour ago. Mitchell's assets are frozen. His offshore accounts were drained by my team. As for the Volkovs, Silas stepped closer to her. I sent Declan and a tactical team to their main warehouse tonight. They found Mitchell trying to hide there. Let's just say the Volkovs blamed Mitchell for the leak, and my men let them handle each other before cleaning up the survivors. Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 8 months. Her knees suddenly felt weak, and she reached out to grip the back of a leather armchair. They're gone? Both of them? They will never threaten you or Leo again, Silas promised, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He set his glass down and stepped right into her personal space. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently tracing the unbruised side of her jaw. The contrast between his lethal reputation and the infinite gentleness of his touch made Clara's heart hammer against her ribs. So, Clara whispered, looking up into his intense gaze. I suppose I should pack Leo's things. We can catch a train to out of state by morning. I'll stay out of your way." Silas's hand slipped to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He didn't pull her hard, but his grip was unyielding. A clear statement of ownership. "You aren't going anywhere," Silas murmured, leaning down until his lips were mere inches from hers. "You think after everything that just happened, after you risked your life to hand me my enemies on a silver platter, I'm going to let you walk out that door?" "Silas, I'm a liability," she breathed, her eyes fluttering shut as his thumb stroked her cheek. "I'm the maid who betrayed you." "You are the woman who outsmarted the feds and the Russian mob," Silas corrected fiercely. "You are the bravest person I have ever met. You protected your son, and in the end, you protected me." He closed the distance, pressing his lips to hers. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was deep, demanding, and possessive. It tasted of expensive bourbon, danger, and a desperate kind of salvation. Clara gasped into his mouth, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his tailored shirt, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. Silas rested his forehead against hers. "You're done scrubbing floors, Clara," Silas whispered into the quiet room. "From now on, you and Leo belong to me, and heaven help anyone who ever tries to touch what is mine." From the hallway, little Leo peeked around the corner, rubbing his sleepy eyes, clutching a new teddy bear. He looked at his mother, then at the tall, frightening man who had answered the phone when the world was ending. Silas looked over Clara's shoulder and offered the boy a rare, genuine smile. For the first time in his violent life, the ruthless syndicate boss didn't just have an empire to run. He had a family to protect. And the real story of Silas Blackwood was only just beginning. Are you ready for more heart-pounding drama and jaw-dropping twists? Hit that like button if Silas and Clara's story kept you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good mafia romance, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, real-life storytelling delivered every single week. Turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter.